Okay, let's go ahead and get started. There's a couple of new things going on. One is that a couple of people in class alerted me. Where is everybody? Why are you sitting all the way in the back? If there's nobody here, I don't spit that much. Only a little bit, and not that far. A couple of people in class alerted me to the fact that I had a due date for the next step of the research project as Thursday, November the 5th. Is that right? 11th, Thursday the 11th. And Thursday is not the 11th, Saturday is the 11th. So that is due Thursday the 9th. Okay? Not Thursday the 11th. And I've updated it everywhere. Right? So it was already okay on the syllabus. But on a couple of pages of Canvas, as well as on the PDF handouts on Canvas, I've updated everything, right? I can't bump it back to Monday the 11th because then I don't have enough time to get you your comments that you need from the progress report in order to hammer working toward the final paper, right? So I want to make sure I have that weekend to go through everything. If it comes in on a Monday, there's every chance I don't get to it all week long, right? So Thursday is better because then I can grade it over the weekend, okay? Right, I will talk more about the progress report on Monday of next week, so you have an idea of what you should be doing. But that's due now 2 weeks from today, right? That's when the 9th is 2 weeks from today. So Monday will give you plenty of time to get yourself together, but you should be spending this time now in the wonderful, relaxing, halcyon days of the fall, in the wake of the midterm. You should be spending your time now shifting your energies into that research project, right? Because that's one of the legs that your grade stands on. So you should be making progress, looking for the books, using your preliminary bibliographies, maybe finding other things that weren't on that bibliography, right? Whenever I pick up a book, I always flip to the back to see if there's something I haven't found yet, right? If somebody else has already invented the wheel, I don't need to reinvent the wheel, right? So we'll talk more about sort of how to do that sort of stuff on Monday, okay? So Canvas has been updated. If you've printed out those PDFs for the next step of the assignment, including the overview, you might want to print out a fresh copy, right? But where I made changes, I did what I did before, which is I put them in highlighted and in red. So you know that that's the new date, okay? Right, so that was, thank you, Peyton and Emma were the ones that told me about this, or Peyton for Emma told me about this. And thanks, if you ever see anything that's just on it looks wrong, please let me know, right? Because we make mistakes. The other thing I did, and I won't show you in class tonight, but you can take a look at home, is I cleaned up the new format for the classes, so it's a little bit clearer. The class is on the left. It tells you what the class is and what it was about. The PowerPoint for that class, the OERs for that class, and the class recording. So it's really much more cleanly laid out, okay? So you might want to take a look at that. It's the same information, just presented in a much more clear fashion, all right? So that's that. We're going to wrap up Italy. We got to look at one more work by Bernini. It's one of those works that, coming out of intro, you ought to see. And then we'll move on to Spain, and time permitting, we'll continue on to Flanders. I've got the next worksheet number 5 is almost done, and as soon as it is, I'll put it up, and I won't, say, hey, it's due tomorrow or anything like that, right? I won't be wicked that way, but I'll be sure to give you plenty of time to work on it. But the next one's coming up soon, and should be up maybe tomorrow morning. The next couple days on my schedule are just kind of a nightmare, so I don't. Right, I've got back-to-back things going on all the way through the end of the day tomorrow. So ideally, if I get up early tomorrow morning, but who knows, right? Okay. Any questions on all of that? Right. We left off talking about Bernini, who is really one of two artists who really defined Baroque Italy. Right, Caravaggio in painting, although of course there are others, but he's sort of the one most people talk about, and Bernini in sculpture and architecture. And we had looked at the David that he made when he was in his early 20s for Cardinal Scipione Borghese, who was the nephew of the Pope. And when the Pope saw this, he asked to be introduced to Bernini, decided this would be a person I could use. And Bernini went on to work for Borghese's uncle and for two other popes down the road. It made his career, and spent the next 30, 40 years of his life working for a number of major patrons in Rome. And so the Baldacchino on your right, one of his early architectural projects. This canopy, that's what a baldacchino is. A canopy over the altar in St. Peter's, over 100 feet tall, in multiple media, metal, marble, gilding, incredibly theatrical. And that's the hallmark of not only the Baroque in general, we saw that with Caravaggio, but in particular with Bernini. And Caravaggio can get drama because he can use lighting, right? He can use that dramatic theatrical lighting, the spotlighting, and he can make things in the foreground, and that adds to the theatrical drama. Bernini, it's about action. Although we're going to see that he's also very good about manipulating light, right? But it's really about action. He loves these twisting, turning figures and these draperies that seem to sort of fill with mass from the inside and flow around the figure to give you that sense of torque, right? Of twist that adds to the sense of action. Like Bernini, he chooses these moments that are climactic or moments before the climax that also add to this overall sense of drama. You know, even in architecture, there's something dramatic, right? He doesn't give us straight columns. He gives us these corkscrew columns that look like David twisting on themselves, right? As if they've got some bound up energy inside of them. Right? Even just little touches like that, right? We looked then at a few small works in local collections. This Risen Christ may be the most in line with typical Bernini style. Again, the figure twisting on axis, breaking away from the core. You know, he's splaying outward in a way as he twists and turns. And then that drapery, right? In this case, even more strongly, swirling around the figure, adding to its sense of action and vibrancy. And these are all hallmarks, like I said, of the Baroque style. Now, our last Bernini, I finally got to see about a year ago. One of these things I bucket list for art historians, right? Things you'd always heard about, read about, and I finally got a chance to go see this in Rome. The Ecstasy of St. Teresa is a private family chapel that Bernini designed everything for. Not only the central sculpture that shows St. Teresa in ecstasy, we'll talk about her in a second, but the architectural elements that surround it. The stained glass up above. He chose the marbles for the columns. He designed the broken entablature up above, that pediment, right, the triangle above her head. Everything up to roughly the ceiling. The ceiling's by somebody else. But everything up to that is Bernini, right? It's this multimedia. It's very much like opera in a way, where all elements work together to really enhance this sense of theatrical drama. And he even presents the centerpiece of St. Teresa with the angel, and we'll look at her more closely, as if it were a theatrical drama. You can see in these two slides that he even includes, on either wall of the chapel, sculptures of the members of the family whose chapel this is. The Cornaro family, you don't need to worry about it, it's not going to be on the exam. Cornaro, the Cornaro family. We see 6 or 7 members of the Cornaro on either side, and they're seated as if they're sort of in theater seats, right? Got these great loge seats where they can look out to the drama that's happening. And there's one of these on either side looking in, right? That adds to this sense of, spectators taking part in something, which is something we've talked about with the Baroque again and again and again. And when it comes to choosing the materials for the chapel, you'll notice the degree to which Bernini, who also was a painter, he did everything, right? Uses the colored marbles again to enhance the sort of dramatic, the flair of it all, right? It's complex, it's complicated, but not to the point of not being able to understand it, right? He even designed in the niche, and we can see this here, and we'll look at her close next, right? Inside the niche where the angel is with St. Teresa, flanked by those grayish-green columns and pilasters, he designed these wooden rods that come down from the ceiling, and they're covered in gold leaf. They look like a series of rays of light. And he also installed inside the chapel a glass window at the top. So during the day, natural light comes down on her in a sort of focused manner, in a way that it doesn't fall in the rest of the church. And it streams down those gold rods as if it were the light of God shining on her. But when you're out in the chapel, if you look at the slide on the right, you can't see that light source. All you see is it filtering down those rods. So it's almost like he's figured out a sculptural answer to Caravaggio, who had these great beams of light that focused your attention, that stood as symbols of God coming down on us, mortals, Bernini has figured out a sort of an analogy for that. So let's look at it, and there we can see the light coming down, right, from up above. Saint Teresa was a saint who, as you can see from her death date, is relatively contemporary. She's not that old. Many of the saints who we often see in religious art that we've talked about in the past have been quite old, right, going back to the time of the founding of the church, or shortly thereafter, right, the period of its first legalization around the 4th century. But Teresa is a rough contemporary. She's only been dead for 60 years, less, when this was made. So roughly contemporary, right? And her death date, 1582, suggests to us she was alive right in the middle of the Council of Trent. Remember the Council of Trent, the Counter-Reformation, was 1543 to 1563. So that puts Teresa of Avila, a Spanish saint, right smack in the middle of the Counter-Reformation. So that makes this work a very prominent Counter-Reformation work, right? Extolling a saint from that period. And one of the things that we talked about with the Counter-Reformation, and this will come up again later today, I hope, is this interest in a personal engagement with religion, right? And remember that art during the Counter-Reformation should be dramatic so that you get personally engaged with it, right? And we saw that happen even if it's not religious art, like our lute player, right? Once you get personally, there's the violin saying, hey, you take the other end, right? And play with it, right? Everything's about that sense of personal engagement. And we talked about another manifestation of that, which was St. Ignatius Loyola. We talked about on Monday, right? Came up with this devotional practice called the spiritual exercises, where you imagine yourself being part of the thing that you're focusing on in your prayers, right? You imagine something physically there, right? Now, St. Teresa is a perfect example of someone whose faith is very, very similar to that idea. That when she prays, it's not a passive act, it's not something that puts her to sleep. Back when I went to church, that was always my problem. Put your head down. I was working like night shifts at a hotel and going to school during the day. To this day, I can fall asleep anywhere, anytime, give me 5, I'm out, right? Prayer was hard, right? Art history classes are hard. It's It's dark, right? You're staring at the screen, right? Anyway, St. Teresa was praying, and as she prayed, an angel appeared to her, and she wrote about this, right? We actually have her writings where she recounts this experience. An angel appeared to her, and she started to feel in her body the pain that Christ felt on the cross. And as she describes the pain, what she says is that it was an angel who came, and he took an arrow and he pierced her heart with the arrow. Right? So that she would feel in her heart the pain, that empathetic reaction to her faith. Right? And she said the angel did it, and it hurt horribly but sweetly. Because we've seen saints don't suffer, right? When we're St. Bartholomew, right? You're going to get peeled alive, but it's not going to really hurt that bad, even if it kills him.
Is that what they're showing right here?
Exactly. So he's showing the moment when the angel comes down, and so Bernini's got to get across this idea that he's going to pierce her heart with that arrow. And again, this is a vision, right? It doesn't she doesn't wake up in the morning bleeding or anything like that, right? But what the angel is doing is beginning to torment her, but it's not the right word, because it's make her feel some inkling of the suffering that Christ felt. Okay? But Bernini's job is to get across two things, right? One is that sense of suffering, but the antithesis, which she says, is that it was sweet. It was beautiful. She didn't want it to stop. Right? And she talked about the angel piercing her again and again with the arrow. And each time it hurt worse and felt better. Right? So Bernini's trying to get that idea across, and you can see from the look on her face, her body is splayed out backwards. This got a little pixelated because it was dark there when I took the photo. Right? But you can see her hand here. You can see down behind the cross that's on the altar, you can see her foot hanging off of the cloud at the bottom, right? And the angel who doesn't want to hurt her, right? This is bliss, ecstatic bliss. The way that Bernini gets that across is, of course, look at how he's holding the arrow. It's not like, it's not like the shower scene in Psycho. Right? He's holding it so daintily, right? Just barely touching it with his fingers and his thumb. And the same thing can be said for how the angel holds her robe, right? Just gently picking it up. And the best doctor's bedside manner, right? This is going to hurt, right? But maybe not so bad. And getting that idea across, right? So this comes directly out of her writings, and Bernini wants you, the viewer, to understand what she, the saint, was feeling, because we all have the opportunity with the proper gearing of our faith to get there as well. Opportunity. Is it going to happen? Highly unlikely to most people in this room, right? But nonetheless, to St. Teresa, and Bernini wants us to understand that. I have a couple of nice details. So there's the angel with the arrow, and again, that smiling, sweet face of the angel trying to get across this idea that he's not hurting her. Look at Bernini's drapery everywhere you look, right? On the angel here, swirling around the angel again, almost as if, like I said, it's voluminous, right? It's puffed up from the inside and then swirls around the figure to add to the sense of motion. And then look at the drapery on Teresa. It's just this tidal wave of folds that have moved over her everywhere we look. And here's a nice detail of her, right? And we can see her foot now hanging down. Her hand's gone entirely limp. Her face has gone entirely limp as well. Bernini now is conveying this idea of her ecstatic moment. And it's a climax again, a dramatic climax, really to her entire life, is this visionary moment. Now, as I mentioned, Bernini practiced these spiritual exercises. He read St. Ignatius Loyola. He knew how to do it, and is from records of his life. We know that he went through that moment where I'll read about the crucifix and I'll try to feel the cross on my shoulders, or I'll read about when Christ is whipped and try to understand how much that must have hurt. Right? And he brings that empathic, sympathetic engagement to the way he approaches art. Right? Terrific picture. It's a stone's throw from the train station in Rome. Even if you've got an hour layover, go see St. Teresa, right? Well worth it. And since it's a church, it's free. Now we're going to move to Spain next. We're going to work our way through Baroque in different countries. So Spain is our next jumping off point here. I'm sorry these slides are looking a little kind of weird today. I don't know what happened. They look a little bit mushier than they do on my screen right here. So something's going wrong with my connection with the projector. So I'm sorry about that. So when we talk about Spain, we've already talked about one Spanish artist. Giuseppe di Ribera had gone from Spain to Naples in Italy, and we discussed him already as one of these international followers of Caravaggio, right? Arriving in Italy shortly after Caravaggio's death, but very much impressed by Caravaggio's works and adopting a great number of his stylistic conventions. Right? So Ribera's there in Italy by 1615 already. He stays there for the rest of his life. He never goes back to Spain, but the pictures do. Right? Ribera paints in Italy, in Naples, for primarily a Spanish clientele, because Naples was governed by Spanish troops. And the pictures, we know, made their way back to Spain. And it's Ribera who becomes the primary conduit for Caravaggio's style being adopted in Spain. Right? His pictures brought that style back, and people in Spain reacted to Ribera's pictures in the same way that Ribera reacted to Caravaggio's pictures, which is wow. Right? There's something here new that meets this new demand for a pious, realistic, accurate, dramatic, emotional kind of art. So when we talk about Spanish painters who look like Caravaggio, like Murillo on the right, they probably never saw Caravaggio, right? Certainly never saw the man, let alone one of his pictures. What they did see was Ribera, right? And his pictures that had come back. Now, the picture from Richmond on your right, the VMFA, Virginia Museum of Fine Arts. Have we seen anything from there yet? This might be the first one, right? VMFA, our state capital, has a really nice picture collection. It's free as well, worth the hour-and-a-half drive, depending on how fast you go on 95. And here, another Spanish Baroque picture, Mary Magdalene. And she became an incredibly popular saint during the Counter-Reformation. Particularly popular. One thing, any saint in the Counter-Reformation who is doing penance, who is asking for forgiveness for their sinful life, that in general, during the Counter-Reformation, into the Baroque period, the idea of saints who are shown in the act of asking for forgiveness were incredibly popular. Because remember, religious pictures are supposed to teach, right? What better thing to teach people than the need for salvation, the importance of asking for forgiveness and taking care of a particular act to ensure of it, right? So Mary Magdalene became incredibly popular because, as you remember, what was she before she was a saint? You can say it out loud. A prostitute, exactly. So here we see her literally climactic moment. moment of transformation, moment of conversion. She's still wearing her prostitute's outfit, but she's now tearing at them, pulling at her hair, which is out and down. Right? For prostitutes, that was common back in the day, right? And looking up toward this Caravaggio source of light as God streams down on her. And she says, it's more than just a conversion, I got to do more. And what she's doing is she's offering up at her feet all of her worldly goods. I'm going to give it all up to follow Christ. And so we see her riches below her, and she's taken off her more fancy clothes. Right? And those are laying in a jumble at her feet as she looks to God and says, I'm willing to give up all this for you. Right? So again, pictures that are didactic, right? They are meant to teach a very particular lesson. Right? Now, Murillo is one of many artists we're going to look at that are active in the most wealthy city in all of Spain. Right? In Spain, the capital of the country was and is Madrid. Right? And that's where the king of Spain lived, was in Madrid. But the most wealthy city in the entire country was the city of Seville. Right? And just as we've seen in other time periods, the wealthiest cities tend to be the cities where the most art is produced. Simply because art is a luxury item, right? I mean, I would argue that you do need it to live well, but you don't need it, you can't eat it, right? You don't need it to get to the next day, like bread and water. So what we do find that art production is economically determined, right? That you need the luxury of excess wealth in order to have art. And so Murillo and most of the Spanish artists we're looking at begin their careers in Sevilla, right? Because that's where the money is. That's where the art-buying populace is. Another artist working in Sevilla is Zurbarán. This image of Saint Lucy, another of these cult of saints that rise up as interest points, as subject matter during the Counter-Reformation and the Baroque period. Saint Lucy. And you can see it's again Caravaggio lighting. Right? Darkened background, foregrounded figure, bright light coming from above, down at an angle. Right? All of those elements are Caravaggio elements. Right? Oh darn, I forgot the detail. Give me just a second. I'm gonna do one thing here, because there's a painting, there's a picture I want to show you. So give me just a second here. I wish I could pause. There we are. Boop. Boop. See if this shows up right away. Well, here, I'll copy that. It's going to take just 2 seconds, and you'll thank me. That is not what I wanted to show up there. Right. Now there. 17. Sorry about the delay, but sometimes it's good for me to shut up. Right? You can all say yes. goes here, and now we go back to this, and we'll see. So, there we go. Right. So, St. Lucy, another saint of this interest in Counter-Reformation saints from exactly this period. She was the daughter of a very, very wealthy family from around the year 300. Right? So we see that this interest in saints, whether it's Teresa, Mary Magdalene, Lucy, across the entire range. And yes, they're interested in male saints as well, but this is just luck of the draw. Around 300 puts her at exactly the moment when Christianity is either, right around 300, being persecuted radically, or just after 300, legalized and becomes the official religion of Rome. Okay? But she's during the period of persecutions. Right? And she was born to a very, very wealthy family. And what we see that Thurberon does is to dress her as a wealthy woman. So she has that beautiful frilly bodice on her dress, the flowers in her hair, that wonderful bow, the pearls, right? The extra fabric down around her hips, the beautiful linen sleeves, right? All of this makes her a very, very wealthy woman to indicate it. But the clothing is the clothing of a 17th century woman from Seville. And this is again to engage you as a viewer, right? To make it relevant to you, to draw you into the picture. So it's not accurate to the time, but it's effective as part of the way it gets its ideas across. Now, she's holding in her hand, her left hand, on your right, a palm frond, the leaf of a palm tree. Right? That big, long, off yellow thing is the leaf of a palm tree. Palm fronds are symbols of martyrdom. Anyone who was killed for their faith in images is often depicted with a palm branch in their hands. Probably comes from Palm Sunday, when Christ entered Jerusalem just before his death, and the people greeted him waving palm branches. Right? But it usually indicates that the saint is not depicted during their earthly life, but instead appears after death. Sort of brought back to their perfection in heaven. So it's a sign of her martyrdom. Now, the legend of St. Lucy and her martyrdom goes back to two different sort of stories. She was devout, so she's the daughter of this wealthy merchant, but she herself has adopted Christianity. Kind of on the slide, because at this point they were under persecution, right? Her father is trying to set her up with somebody to marry, to pass on the dowry and whatnot, right? And there's a young suitor who comes to visit and tells her that he thinks she's the most beautiful thing in the world, and in particular he says, "I love your eyes. Your eyes are so beautiful." And the legend is that she decides that she doesn't want him to be attracted to her because she has put her faith and her fidelity in God. She doesn't want to be involved with a man, Jesus, instead. So what does she do when a man tells her eyes are the most beautiful thing in the world? Plucks them out, right? And there they are, right? Look like oysters or something, on the plate. And what happened was that when she was finally martyred, and they went to bury her, one of her miracles was, there they were again, back inside her sockets. So she appears with her eyes in her head and her eyes on a plate. Now what's interesting in Latin, Italian, Spanish, Lucia means light. Lucid, we say, when someone is thoughtful, right? Light. Elucidate, clarify. So her name is related very much to her legend. Saint Lucy, the saint of light, sight, right? Light passing through. But she has them now back in her head. Yeah. The other legend, there's two different legends of St. Lucy, is that basically when she's being tortured and they're saying, give up your God, they pluck out her eyes then. Right? So the two separate legends. But I like the one of her saying, I don't want you to like my eyes anymore, so off they go. Another artist active in Seville is Diego Velázquez, and he is to Spanish art what Bernini and Caravaggio are to Italian art in the Baroque period. He really is the show. There's sort of Velázquez and everybody else. And he paints this while he's still living in Seville, right? The water carrier of Seville. And as you might guess from the title, from looking at the picture, that this is another genre scene, right? Remember what genre scenes are? A scene of everyday life. So this is simply a scene of a man who carries water to distribute it to the people of Seville, probably for a small surcharge, right? And in Spain, very warm, right? A nice cool glass of water is a wonderful thing. And that's one of the things that Velázquez is trying to get across with this picture, is that transferring of the cool glass of water from his big earthenware jug at the bottom into the porcelain jug on the left, and even pouring a nice cool glass, and you can even see that it's frosted on the outside because the water is so cool in this hot temperature in the glass that we see him handing off. Right? Again, totally Caravaggio, right? Again, secondhand Caravaggio, because he's getting it out of Ribera. But a darkened background, spotlight on the primary figures, right? A limited color scheme, an extreme foregrounding to add to some sense of drama, even though it's not a religious picture. Now, when we've seen genre scenes in the past, one of the things we've always seen with a genre scene is that they carry some sort of allegorical message, right? So the money changer and his wife looks like a scene of everyday life, but within that there are these ideas of paying attention to religion when you're praying, of not letting money distract you from religion, right? Do you remember this from Matsice, right? With Bruegel, when we saw the hunters in the snow, it was similar to Bosch's Wayfarer, where people pass by temptation to go about their daily life. Looks like a genre scene, but has allegorical significance. So the question for us is, with Velázquez, is this the case? Might there be some deeper meaning to this picture than simply a guy given water? What's water usually a metaphor for? What do we, when we think about water, what do we think about? Life. Water is life, right? So if we take that theme, and we've seen it before, right? With Klaus Schluter's Moses one, we talked about water as water of life, right? And without water, I have this habit of in my office, like getting barreled into work and not even getting a glass of water, and I feel like a flower. And you get water and you perk up again. Yeah. Water is life to all of us. Without it, you'll die faster from thirst than from hunger, right? Because you need it. If water is life, then this picture takes on a really fascinating kind of resonance and meaning if we follow that idea of water as life. Right? We have a man passing water to other people. Look at the ages of the people in the picture. who's passing the water is the oldest of these three people. The one who's taking the water from him is the youngest of these three. And the man in the background, in the shadow behind them, the one who's drinking water, can you see that? He's got a cup covering the lower part of his face, is between them in age. Right? Old, mature, and young. Right? The old man passes the water to the young man. The man in the middle, in the midst of life, drinks it. Right? So there is buried within this a sort of more learned, right, more complex allegory. Now, it's not necessarily a moralizing scene, like we saw with those Flemish painters, right, from Antwerp, where you're meant to laugh and think how stupid these people are. There's nothing like that, but there is something beyond the face value of the work. Right? So for Velázquez, who at this point in his career is, I think he's like 18 years old. Again, this is, I can't imagine. We have a number of artists that we're going to look at who are really good, before they're 17. Velázquez is one of them. Part of it came from the fact that he trained in his, wife's father's studio. Right? They didn't do college education, although they got that, but they did apprenticeships from the get-go. So they got good quick. In any event, he's very, very young here at this point in his career. And he's, I think in many ways, absolutely terrific as a painter. And one of the things I think he's trying to do with this picture is to broadcast his skills. And I want to look at a couple of details to talk about what really makes this picture, sets this picture apart. If we look at the three main figures, you'll notice that Velázquez, even though the one in the back is in shadow, Velázquez is very good about understanding the difference in the textures of skin. So that the man on the right, as the waterseller himself, out in the sun all day, skin is dry, chafy, leathery. The little boy, not yet outside all the time, pale and soft in skin. And the man in the background, somewhere between the two. He understands texture, and he's able to paint for that. Now we've seen again and again that Baroque art is about more senses than vision, right? It's about touch. It's about sound. It's about taste. It's about smell. And Velázquez is picking up touch with this. I think also he's picking up taste. Water doesn't taste like much until you've had some that's really good mineral water, right? Until you've had some that's really bad, right? When I first moved here, I used to think that the water here stunk because I came from Portland. It all came from the mountains where I was from. And now I'm used to it, Now it all tastes fine. But at first it was like, vile, right? Velázquez and the sense of taste and touch. Textures also appear in the different elements that he includes in this very simple composition. Whether it's the robe of the waterseller with the wool covering the linen, or the young boy, or this pot in the foreground, this unglazed earthenware pot. And we can tell it's unglazed because the water shines where it's fallen on the earthenware. And we can see the beads of water as it runs down. He's dripped a little bit on the belly of the pot. And it's shiny there where it's not shiny next to it. He's able to manipulate the paint to truly give you a sense of different surface qualities. That pot looks different from this one, right? The glazed pot down below with the dimples. Or the porcelain pot where glass is mixed into the clay, a much finer kind of pottery at the very top. And then there's that wonderful glass that the boy is holding. It's gotten a little bit frosted on the outside and where he understands the light coming through it. Right? All of these are different textures, and in many ways, Velázquez, I think, is beginning to show off his talent as a young artist to demonstrate what he's good for. Now, works like genre paintings are usually not commissioned works of art. They are works of art that are made for the open market. And Velázquez made a number of these when he was young. And in each of them, I think he's trying to establish himself, to build a market share, trying to develop a clientele. Now, we have one of these genre scenes down at the National Gallery, much later in his career, right? 20 to 30 years later in his career. A woman stitching, a needle worker, right? Mending or making lace, we don't know for sure because the picture is unfinished. The bits at the bottom on the left have not been fully completed. This was still in Velázquez's collection when he died. We don't know why he never finished it. He was probably just making it for himself and moved on to something else. If we look in detail, we can see that the fingers themselves are just sketched in, right? Especially the forefinger on her right hand. Yeah. But you can also see the background and even that pillow in front of her that have really hardly been painted at all. So another genre scene for us. Now, again, the question is, does it have other meaning? This woman making lace, this woman sewing, doing a domestic activity, doing some industry. Is it allegorical? Is there a metaphor here? And this one, it requires a bit of knowledge about the history of art to understand. When we look at images of lace making, of women sewing, weaving, or making lace, they are often linked to images that show seduction or attempted seduction. That lace making itself is linked to a woman's activity. And for a male artist, a male populace, women's activities are a turn on. So in this case, this is a print, right? This is another engraving, like Durer's, but slightly earlier, Rumsen. This man, very nicely dressed, has visited now a woman who's making wool yarn for weaving. Very similar. And as she's doing this, got the bobbin working out, got the cat on the ground, she's in her domestic home, he's become aroused. How do we know that? Look at the sword, right? It's not that he has a sword between his legs, but he's playing with it as well, right? And he's got the sword, and it's horrible, but it's in the hilt, and he's, right? Pulling the sword out of the hilt, pushing it back in again. And that's to indicate the fact that whatever she's doing, he's finding rather attractive. So when we go to Velázquez, the question is, does that meaning translate through the centuries? Right? Are you, the viewer, intended to be attracted by this? And one could argue that with the low bodice on her dress, the highlighting of her breasts, that might be the case. But unfortunately, it's unfinished, and a lot of people still leave it open. That maybe over the centuries, the idea of a genre scene that has allegorical significance begins to disappear. That we just get genre scenes for their own sake. With Velázquez, we simply don't know. I want to show you one more lace-making scene from the 17th century. This is from Holland, where we see a woman now, very similar to our needlewoman, working by candlelight. Now, working by candlelight itself is symbolic. Right? Working late into the night, industrious. dedicated. And there's this guy, right? Come in from the outside. We see his fur hat, and he looks at her. She's got even under her feet, there's a nice little box to keep her feet warm, full of coals. That's the foot warmer. And what's he doing? He's offering her money, right? He's come up. He's grabbing her. Look at her. He's got his hand on her shoulder. Hey, stop doing that. And he's propositioning her, right? He's asking her, do you want to have sex for money instead? Stop doing the thing you're doing to make money. I've got an easier way. Yeah. Rude, yeah? So the question with Velasquez is, okay, does this fit in here somewhere as a woman making lace? Whether it's the earlier message of it being a turn on and maybe she's in on it, to the later message where it's, the jerky man and the woman who's trying to be industrious, he just wants to interrupt her. Does Velasquez's picture fall into that somewhere? And these are distinct possibilities, because the history of genre pictures is indeed a history of pictures that bring allegorical messages with them. Now, Velasquez, going back to the watercolor. I wanted to put that one out of order a bit because they were both genre scenes, right? When Velasquez painted the Water Cellar of Seville, he gave it to a local dignitary, friend of the family. And that dignitary had just accepted a job with the King of Spain and took the Water Cellar of Seville with him to Madrid from Seville. And he showed the painting to the new King of Spain, Philip IV. And Philip, when he saw the picture, told the emissary from Seville, go get him, bring him here, I want him working for me. Right? He recognized immediately the talent in the young artist's work. And Velasquez, after about 1623, spends the rest of his life as the court painter to Philip IV of Spain. And the very first portrait he ever did for Philip has been lost, but the one we have on the left is quite early. What did Philip want from Velasquez? What did he see in this picture that he could use? Well, I'll tell you. Philip was horribly ugly. You can even tell, right? Look at those lips, right? That potato face, right? Heavy jowl, thick nose. Philip was a member of the Habsburg family, and they were leaders of Europe going back about 200 years by this point. And they had consolidated their power through intermarriage, marrying first cousins, right? To bring the different houses, different parts of Europe, under one ruling house. And by Philip's time, the Habsburg family, through all this inbreeding, had gotten to the point where they're coming out. Right? And most of Philip's children died in childbirth or very, very young from the birth defects that come as a result of this. Right? So what does he want from Velasquez? He wants him to make him look better. I used to show an x-ray of that. That's better. Right? It was worse than that to begin with. And that's what kept Velasquez popular with Philip IV through the decades, was his ability to make him look fantastic. Now this brings us to the most famous picture Velasquez did for Philip 30 years later. Monster picture. We'll look at it, its real size in a bit. Las Meninas, and really one of the most fascinating pictures really that I think has ever been painted. It's really weird and really kind of cool in a lot of ways. So, what's going on here? It's a portrait of Philip's daughter, but it's not. Right? Philip's daughter is the little girl in white in the middle of the picture, and she is surrounded by her ladies in waiting, right? Her entourage, if you will, and that's what Las Meninas means, the ladies in waiting, right? And Meninas is the lady in waiting. But what's really fascinating about this is how Velázquez takes that idea of a portrait of a girl and turns it into something totally different in a way, totally Baroque as well. Everyone is looking at you, right? Look at how many people make eye contact with you. All but one or two of them. So even though the subject of the picture is the little girl, in some ways the subject of the picture is you, looking at it. And you'll notice that even Velázquez himself is there, caught in the act of painting. So that it looks like he makes it look unstaged, right? Rather than just being like Philip on the left, waiting to have his picture taken, it's almost as if he catches her in this moment. They're goofing off in his studio, right? He's there, he's painting, they've come to visit, maybe they liked hanging out with Diego, who knows, right? But they've all stopped for a second to look at us. Even Velázquez has stopped doing what he's doing to look at us, right? To look at the viewer, to look at Philip, who's the one who paid for this. Right? The daughter is Margarita. Philip had, I've got to look at my notes for this, right? Philip had 8 children before Margarita, and all but one of them had died. Over and above that, not only did she survive, but she was incredibly beautiful, which for a Habsburg, right, is a rare thing. Right? She's a cute kid. He hadn't had any cute kids, and none that lived. Well, 1 out of 8, right? There's the daughter that lived, and you can see Philip's features in her. The jowls, the lips, the nose. Margarita has none of those characteristics. She became instantly his beloved daughter, right? The one he loved above all others. Healthy and beautiful. And he commissions from Velázquez a number of portraits of her. Here she's a little bit older, right? By Velázquez. Because again, that's his principal job, is to paint portraits. I had all these elaborate notes, but I think I'm just going to wing it. A couple of things about Velázquez that I want to talk about with this. First, with Las Meninas, one could argue that yes, we've got Caravaggio lighting again, right? It totally looks like the light's coming in from an off camera somewhere, some windows that we only see hinted at on the right, seem to illuminate the entire scene. It darkens the background. It gives us Caravaggio, right? At the same time, that's not all Velázquez does. He does it here. He did it with the water cellar. Does it with the needlewoman. But he's also able to work in portraits that don't do that, like the portrait on your left. And this portrait on the left, at least, of Margarita, shows us one of Velázquez's amazing strengths, which is, I think, on a certain level, derived out of Caravaggio. Caravaggio worked in a limited color range, right? Browns and oranges and reds and yellows. A very limited part of the color spectrum. Velázquez is also able to do that, but he's also able to do it in other color ranges. So if you look at the portrait on your left, everything is aqua and pink. Everything. It's a two-color picture, which itself is incredibly difficult. And this points to something that is particularly strong about Velázquez and particularly strong about a lot of Baroque art that we're going to see, particularly painting. And that is, remember that with Baroque art, there's this attempt to engage you, right? To make it dramatic, active, exuberant, and emotionally engaging, right? And the lighting that Caravaggio uses is one way to go about doing that. But for Velázquez, one of his solutions is to use the brush work. The way in which he puts the paint on the canvas to make it energetic, to make it engaging, to make it activated, to make it emotional. The actual application of paint. Now, how does he do this? Who else we talked about? Titian, right? Did that? Well, Philip IV owns more Titians than anybody on the planet. Titian worked for Philip's great-grandfather, maybe great-great-grandfather, for a number of years. There are Titians all over the palace in Madrid for Velázquez to see. Here's a close-up, so we can talk. I'm talking about her. Okay, come on. There. That's the flower on her chest, right? And with Velázquez, when you get close, right, you don't see polish, you see paint, like what we saw with Titian, right? And as we look at her flower up close, it almost looks like an abstract expressionist painting. Just flashes of white paint, flashes of black paint, swirls of red, right? Don't you wish you could do that? It makes it because it looks so freaking easy. You know, to get a flower that from a distance, like beautiful corsage, but is just magic, right? And you may not notice it right away. You may not notice it at all, but psychologically, that effect of the paint on the surface, right, is something that grabs you and holds your attention when you look at it. And it also begins to play with your mind in a way, because your mind goes back and forth between looking at this as a three-dimensional object, a girl, and then looking at it as a two-dimensional object, paint on a canvas. Right? Your mind goes back and forth between these things. It's rather forward-looking in the degree to which Velázquez does this. One of the things that's also fascinating is he doesn't do it everywhere. Certain elements come into focus. Certain elements come into polish. So as he's laying the paint on the canvas, he's doing it in a way to direct your attention. So the focus comes tighter on the face of Margarita than it does elsewhere. So that your mind, also your eye, does the same thing. Focusing on her. And as we look at other figures around her, we find that the focus loosens as we move away from her. Look at the sleeve on that girl, right, on one of the ladies in waiting. She's serving her some tea, right, that cute little red teapot, and gesturing to her. And you'll notice that it's less focused than Margarita. And then look at the hand in the background. Right, this one here. And it's just, he's capturing motion. He's capturing movement with the different figures. Here again, focus on the face, less focus on the bodice and on the dress. He's fantastic at laying down the paint in a way that's engaging. If we move behind her, these two people are totally out of focus, right? And remember, he doesn't have cameras to work with, right? He's sort of intuiting this idea about the way that we look at things, right? If I look at Daniela, then the people in the back of the room are out of focus, and vice versa. right? He understands that. He's figured out a painting analogy. But you'll notice again how many of these people are looking at us, right? Even the fellow in the back standing in the doorway is looking at us. All members of court, all members of the entourage around Infanta Margarita. It's not politically correct, but they kept dwarves for court entertainment. This was a common facet of Baroque court life. So we have a dwarf there in blue, another little boy, perhaps also from that family on the right.
I might be wrong, but I heard that Philip IV only hired short people so they wouldn't intimidate their daughters.
It could be. It could also make them feel better, in a certain way. If you surround yourself with short, right, then you feel better about yourself. I don't know if that's entirely. One of the things that I've often read about this picture is the little boy is kicking the dog, but that little boy isn't kicking that dog. That is the happiest dog you're ever going to see. He's getting his butt scratched, right? He's not kicking, he's going, and the dog is, right? And he's going to get the involuntary leg action going, right? That is amazing. I heard this great, sorry. You guys don't mind the tangents, do you? I heard this paper at a conference once that was talking about the history of dogs, right? And dog breeding, and I thought it was kind of cool. And what's interesting, what kind of a dog is a spaniel? Right? Lap dog. Well, do you know what spaniels were named? They were named in the 17th century by the English because a spaniel, a Spanish dog, is this little house pet that sits on your lap and does anything you tell it to. And that was their way of demeaning Philip IV and his court, the Habsburg court in Spain. When in fact Spanish dogs are mastiffs, right? They're big hunting dogs, they're the real Spanish breeds. So there was this politics involved in naming spaniels, right? Because they weren't Spanish dogs by breed. They were English dogs by breed. So anyway, I found that fascinating. This is a Spanish dog, right? From the 17th century, and he has just got that look on his face that he could not be any happier, right? But again, it's all this life at court that Velázquez has included. And again, how many of these people are here looking at you, the viewer? There's Velázquez himself, right? Looking, and you'll notice that Velázquez here, and this is kind of, I think, part of what I've been leading up to, is that Velázquez isn't dressed in the way that you should dress when you're painting. You'll notice the crest on his chest. He is dressed as a knight, as a nobleman, a member of an exclusive order. Right? That's how that crest on his chest is. With a beautiful costume, with a silk ruff on his neck. This is not what you wear to paint. You guys all know this, don't you? You're going to get dirty. You wear something you don't mind getting dirty. And that's not how he's dressed. So all of these elements about how he is able to manipulate paint so well goes back to the fact that for Velázquez, painting is itself a noble pursuit, worthy of praise, not just a craftsman. And to the degree that when Philip IV asks for a portrait of his daughter, and he gets ostensibly a portrait of Velázquez painting something while his daughter is playing there, only attests to the fact that painting has put him where he is. Right? Painting has made him the man he is, has given him the status that he has. Again, look how wonderful Velázquez is at capturing motion, that hand that seems to be moving. Now, everybody's turning and looking at you, right? Everybody's out here. And this is what adds this level of strangeness to the picture. Because on a certain level, some people have argued that what Velázquez is doing is looking at a mirror. So he can paint the dog. That maybe he's painting the thing that we're looking at. That we see him making the painting that we're looking at. Because the painting that we're looking at is about the same size as that canvas on the left. Right? You measure it up, and I'll show you a picture in the museum in the Prado in Madrid. That's roughly the size of the picture. So it's been suggested that he's looking at it. It's this weird sort of painting about making a painting. Where he's looking at a mirror, they're all looking at the mirror, and he's over here painting what he's seeing out there. Right? But, what's behind her head? A mirror, right? With two people reflected in it. Right? And there's Philip. And we can even see him there. And his wife, right? Mariana of Austria, are behind him. And can you tell she's a Habsburg too? Right? They're married, right? But she's from the family. She's got the same look. So, this is probably who they're looking at. Right? Philip and mom and dad come into the room, and everybody stops and gives them the respect that they're due. Right? Oh, hi. We'll stop for a second. Right? You're here. Let me put this down and stop working for a second to say hello to Dad. At the same time, because there's that curtain in the mirror, the red curtain that's coming down, some people have suggested that the mirror maybe is intended to reflect the canvas that Velázquez is painting. Because usually in portraits, we see a curtain pulled back as part of the artifice of portraiture. And the fact that there's a curtain pulled back in the mirror suggests that maybe it's reflecting a painting rather than the real people. But it's not aligned properly, is it? Right? It's aligned properly to reflect you, the viewer. It's not aligned properly to reflect that picture. Now that said, do you know this principle about mirrors and reflections? That a reflection on a mirror is always half the size of the thing that's reflected. Somebody told me this one, I didn't believe him. I went and you take a Sharpie and you draw on it, and you'll see that it's quite literally half the size. If you look at the size of Philip and Mariana in the mirror, where should they be in the room? They're way too big in the mirror to be where we are as viewers. They're about the right size to be where Velázquez is. Can you make that out all right? Right? You just imagine them as this is a realistic mirror reflection. So they're the right size to be reflecting about Velázquez's size. And if that's a canvas that Velázquez is painting, could it be a canvas of the two of them? We don't have one. That's the problem, right? Wouldn't it be great if there was a portrait of the two of them with the red curtain pulled back? Probably from the other side because it's reflected, right? Then we can say, oh, there it is. He's painting that picture, but we don't know, right? And again, I think Velázquez is intending this because he's creating a world. He's like Van Eyck. He's creating a world that's incredibly realistic, but within that realism are these artificial things. You're late. Didn't you say you have to leave at 6? Okay. Okay. There's the real size, right, of this thing. It's life size, right? Again, one of these pictures we can see better here than at the Prado because there's always a crowd. Velázquez has come up with this composition that is this testament about what it means to be a painter, right? And the kind of power a painter has. The power to create a world where it looks absolutely realistic, where light comes in from every direction, and where, at the same time, he, the painter, can violate all those rules, like with that mirror. One last thing, and then we'll quit, which is there are pictures on the wall in the background. Wait, there's him. Pictures on the wall in the background. We can identify these from the Royal Collection. Right? These are pictures that belong to Philip, but Velázquez kept in his painting studio at the palace. And each of the pictures is a mythological picture from ancient Rome. And the mythologies in each of them is where an artist challenges the gods. Says, I can do what you do better. And is punished for that. This ties into the meaning of the overall picture. This is about art. Elevating the status of the artist creating a world like the gods create worlds, but doing so in a way that is mysterious, wonderful, and behaves by its own rules. Right, at 6:15 we'll pick up with Baroque Flanders on Monday. Right, so we're going to go back to Antwerp and go from there to Holland. There will be a worksheet coming up soon, as I mentioned at the beginning of class. As soon as it does, I will email you about it. Remember, the due dates for that are always on Canvas because we're running behind on the class schedule, right? Okay, I will see you guys on Monday.